webinar, we're going to get started. So hi, everyone. My name is Jessie. I am the Partnerships Manager here at MedSchoolCoach. In today's webinar, we're covering the topic of how to ace situational judgment tests. Leading the presentation today, we have Dr. Emil Chuck and Dr. Renee Marinelli. Dr. Emil Chuck is the Director of Advising Services here at the Health Professional Student Association, which is part of the Student Doctor Network, with a focus on empowering students from underserved communities and those pursuing various healthcare fields, including dentistry, pharmacy, and psychology. Dr. Chuck aims to foster confidence and success within the healthcare community. We also have Dr. Renee Marinelli, who is the Director of Advising here at MedSchoolCoach. Dr. Marinelli has practiced family medicine, served on the admissions board for University of California, and has helped hundreds of students get into medical school. She spearheads a team of physician advisors who guide the med school students here. Before we get started, just a few ground rules. If you have any questions or want to put, or make any comments, feel free to put them into the Q&A in the chat sections below. The presentation will go on for around 35 to 40 minutes. We'll leave about 20 to 25 minutes at the end for Q&A with Dr. Chuck and Dr. Marinelli. We are also recording this webinar, so feel free to take your notes, but just know that you'll get a recording of the webinar 24 hours after the webinar is finished. And with that, Dr. Chuck and Dr. Marinelli, I will let you take it from here.
Would you like to start first, Dr. Marinelli?
Well, yeah, I'll just say thank you so much for having me, and thank you for joining us tonight, Dr. Chuck. I don't have any more to say about my introduction because Jessie did a fabulous job, so I'll let you take it away.
Sure, and thank you, Dr. Marinelli, and thank you, Jessie, so much for allowing me to present for your constituents who are part of this webinar and anybody else who comes in later on for the recording session. And I'll admit there's a lot here, and so I hope you take the time to look over the recording, see that there's a lot of dense information in here, and take advantage of some of the other citations and resources that are pretty much embedded in here. It's going to go, my presentation is going to go super quick, admittedly, and the way that I have things sort of set up, there will be opportunities for you to engage at least to some of the situations that are presented, and I would prefer that the chat room be used for that purpose. If you have any other questions about anything about our presentation, please feel free to use the question and answer side of the house as well too. So please make sure that we sort of get as efficient as we can to try to get answers as we're able to. I'm just showing you today's agenda, just an overview of the presentation that we have, some basics about what situational judgment tests are supposed to be doing, how they are likely used in admissions, at least based on what we have been observing from 2 situational judgment experience surveys that we've conducted over the last 2 years. And then a little bit more about who we are and how we make decisions, and then how situational judgment tests leverage that process in order for you to at least hopefully excel in those types of situations when you are confronted with them. We have a couple of simulated scenarios that we will use, and hopefully that'll spark your interest in this topic. And then we'll sort of wrap it up by identifying some of the resources that both of our organizations have to help you prepare for these situational judgment tests. Then we'll follow with your questions and answers and a conversation with Dr. Marinelli. So just very briefly, situational judgment tests, if you're really worried about them, I assure you, don't worry about it. These have actually been around medical and health professions education for a very long time, about 50 years or so, and probably a little bit longer, quite frankly. You probably will hear, once you get into health professions programs, about objective structured clinical exams. They are practically the bread and butter of your education that help prepare you for licensure exams. And multiple mini interviews have been around for about 20 years or so. They're an extension of basically situational judgments that are like OSCE exams, but just without the clinical knowledge involved with it. So, they're basically both sides of the same coin, and many of these other situational judgment tests basically are going to do the same thing. So the two main players that I'm sure many of you have heard about, we're going to go over them very briefly. One is the Acuity Insight Suite, known as predominantly Casper. Duet is another values-based assessment that we won't really cover so much because it's not really situational judgment. And then the other that you've certainly heard is the preview exam for those of you who are trying to enter allopathic medical programs and some osteopathic medical programs as well. And I try to update this slide as much as I can every year. This is the time of year where we get to see all of that. I do have on this slide Cure Talent, and I'm not really going to go over that in this presentation, but I will emphasize the fact that since these two players have been around in admissions at least for a year, maybe a little bit longer for the pilot testing of preview, there is certainly an opportunity that many of you who are applying to medical school are going to be taking both situational judgment tests. And we estimated this last year in 2023 that, just based on the population of applicants applying to these states that have programs that require one or the other test, we're thinking about 20% of the AMCAS pool taking the at least both situational judgment tests. And what turned out is at the end of the first cycle of full implementation of preview, turned out that about 20,000 applicants took the preview exam, which means that in all likelihood, a good portion of them probably took both exams as well. So already preview is a little bit outpacing my own anticipated expectations of how many people are going to be using this test. So these types of presentations are very important to share with everybody, and just letting you know, please don't panic about that. Preview and many of these situational judgment tests have been developed to really emphasize the importance of pre-professional or the professional competencies, which AAMC just recently redefined or reconfigured earlier prior to the start of this application process. They've pretty much set the goals for what preview and other SJTs are really all about, which is a way to assess in a standardized format the professional competencies, how well you understand them, and how important they are for your success as a medical school student. And certainly they're also interested in research to see how these tests could be used wisely in an admissions standpoint, and see if there's predictability about your ability to maintain professionalism as a learner. So these are just basically some of the main goals that preview had at the very onset when these tests were developed about 10 years ago. Flipping the page a little bit to Casper, as I mentioned, Casper's been around for a while. And in fact, it's probably the preeminent situational judgment test used in a variety of different health professions programs. I mean, just look at this list, and I'm not going to read them all off for you. But for all intents and purposes, if you're thinking about any sort of health professional career, you're going to wind up having to go through Casper to be admitted into any of the programs that are up in Canada. The US, we certainly are not that prolific in terms of our use of situational judgment tests. But as you can see on the list, on the left side, there are a number of different admissions programs that have adopted Casper as a situational judgment test as a part of your admissions process. And more recently, a lot of graduate programs have also been using Casper as part of their selection process for people in residency. So I sort of warn any of you out there, if you're thinking about physician assistant, if you're thinking about dentistry, you have to be mindful of the fact that some of those programs are requiring you to take situational judgment tests, such as Casper. And so I just want to make sure that you know that, if you think you can avoid it in the beginning, chances are you're not going to avoid it later on, whether it's Casper or certainly other OSCEs that you will have to take. Both of these exams identify the key competencies that their tests are designed to assess. And basically, this is my highlighted slide just to try to match and try to see which are the common competencies that both exams cover. The main ones that you can see, first of all, is that pretty much almost every single competency from Preview and Casper are covered in both situational judgment tests, except for problem solving, which I'll go into that a little bit later, how Casper is specifically designed to really assess your problem solving skills in a way that Preview does not. But before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about what it's like to take these situational judgment tests, because we've been all fielding so many interesting complaints and a lot of stories about what it's like to take these assessments. And no one really has done a really good job looking at the experience of what it's like to take these assessments in any case, and certainly comparing the two. So we did a pilot study for the situational judgment experience, and we have a couple of articles that we posted on our blog site so that you can read them and you can see some of the results that we have. I want to assure you that people were thinking that, oh, they're situational judgment tests. So if I do really well in one, I ought to do really well in the other. Oh, the fact of the matter is that's not necessarily true. They're both different tests in content and format and in scoring. And that you will see in sort of the way that, as you see in this grid, the distribution of scores, at least based on quartiles, that are self-reported here. What you wind up seeing is that, for Casper, in this particular respondent group, for those that took both Casper and Preview, Casper was pretty evenly distributed across all 4 quartiles. Whereas if you look at the Preview scores for those same individuals, there's a significant skew towards the highest quartile of performance. So, I just want to make sure that don't tell yourself that you do well in one, you're going to do well in the other. That's not necessarily the case. You need to study and understand the differences in these 2 tests. Other things that you also want to make sure about is you understand what the challenges are like when you take the SJTs. And I will credit the test makers that they've been making significant strides to address many of those challenges. And I sort of highlighted in these slides here too. So in many cases, people are sort of concerned that for Casper, they have a lot of their situations require typed responses. Well, they have now introduced video responses as well to incorporate it into the exam. So that hopefully mitigates some of the challenges of just relying on typed responses and the speed of typing. There still remains to be a lot of concerns about the live proctoring that Preview had and how invasive it was to make sure all the security checks are performed properly on one's computer. So this past year, there's a new video just to basically let people become more familiar with what that process is like. Everyone obviously is complaining and has always complained there isn't enough practice questions. And, granted, there aren't enough practice questions, but both Casper and Preview have come out with additional practice tests and practice material that will help people get more familiar with the exam and certainly the platform interface to know what it's like when you were actually taking the exam. And certainly, we're doing our part for Student Doctor Network. We have a free Casper situational judgment test forum, so you can sort of peruse through about 50 different situations and try to see how you would respond to them, at least in a Casper or MMI type format. But the major concern that still pervades everybody in our surveys is the fact that there's very little known about how these results are used in admissions decisions. And that's something we wanted to tackle a little bit more for this most recent situational judgment test survey that we did. And among the things that we realized from our survey cohort this time is that we started to see some very interesting trends in that Casper performance seemed to have some sort of a correlation with how well individuals self-disclosed what their CARS scores were. So it's interesting that when I pointed out earlier that Casper was designed to test for problem solving, I think many of us also recognize that elements of what you consider problem solving in terms of teasing out trivial information from relevant information, that's certainly one of the keys of doing well in the CARS part of the MCAT. So it was very interesting, and it was something that was not observed in the literature before to see that type of a correlation. And obviously, there's more that needs to be done to see if that's really true. On the flip side, Preview does not show any correlation with the MCAT CARS score. And even a publication that came out from the MCAT team, the Preview team also confirmed this from their side of the house when they have their whole entire data set. And they found no correlation with MCAT outcome with the Preview score. So it's interesting that we also did not see any similar relationship there. But one relationship we did see was that the Preview scores were higher among our respondents that had more post-bac or graduate training coming into the application process. And we didn't see a similar type of trend for our Casper scores. So we're still very open to see what a full set of data and a full statistical analysis is going to say about that. But it's just interesting to kind of remark some of the trends that we were seeing. Regardless of it, the use of this situational judgment tests had a lot of variety in terms of whether people felt that this was a very useful part and component of the admissions process or not part of the admissions process. And that was shown by the fact that we actually asked people to tell us if they got early invitations to interview. Like, we're talking August, September, October. And, if they got early invitations to interview, what was their Casper scores? And was there any sort of correlation, especially if they told us that they were first or second, third, or fourth quartile in those exams? And what you wind up seeing is that there isn't really a consistent pattern that our respondent group said that showed that if you did really well in SJTs, you got a better chance at getting an early interview in the process. And that's interesting because, of course, these tests are supposed to be designed to help with high volume holistic review of applications. That's the goal for the preview exam, and that's also a stated goal for Casper. So we don't have yet a very strong data set that supports that people are using it to totally exclude people who score below a certain percentile or are in the lower quartiles of performance. So I want to emphasize to you, it's still very early yet. There's a lot of people that are still doing a lot of validation surveys, but do not get discouraged just outright if you come up with a lower than ideal SJT score or result. Keep pushing forward, whatever happens. Many of them are using it, as I said, for research purposes. But again, we don't see any specific evidence that shows that we're completely excluding people because they have lower scores. This might not be the case for other professions, however, because we do have some anecdotal stories about how people are being excluded that way. In any event, we really rely on the responses of people who do respond to our calls to participate in our surveys. So if you follow Student Doctor Network, keep your eyes out. We will likely be rolling out some new surveys here and there to look at the overall application experience, including these virtual interviews. We're rolling out some of our results from our recorded video interview survey, which looks at Kira Talent and some of those other virtual interview platforms that come in the whole entire process that you may not be very knowledgeable about right now, but they are pretty much all over health professional admissions right now. So stay tuned, but be involved with us, and we would love to hear back from you as you are going through the application process this upcoming cycle. Let's take a little bit of a shift in the conversation, and let's just talk about how you make decisions and how these SJT assessments look at your decision-making ability, your problem solving instead. And I pretty much, we all make decisions every day of various consequence, everyday single trivial decisions, big decisions that require a lot of thought, a lot of decision-making, a lot of collaboration, a lot of consent, some impulsive decisions here and there. And of course, the decision of, you really don't know, you need some help making decisions. These are just some examples of decisions that we all make every day. And for most people, the decisions that we make usually fulfill some need. If you are familiar with psychology, this is the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I think for most of us make decisions that really satisfy any one of these elements of the Maslow's hierarchy. Basically, we at least get food, we get water, we get sleep. We feel more safe being where we are. We feel like we belong to a community, or we self-actualize, or at least confirm our own value to others one way or another about that. So I think keep that in mind, that a lot of times we usually want to make decisions that fulfill or satisfy these needs that we always have psychologically. And that makes a difference when it comes into how you make decisions. So this is an actual flowchart of a decision-making model that middle school students are actually taught in Colorado, I think, actually. And what I will mention is that, this is a really nice plan that tells you what the process is like when you are confronted with the situation. You think about how you would respond. You think about what were the consequences. That will help you make a decision. And then once the decision is made, you kind of figure out whether that was right or wrong. Could you improve one way or another? And that can be a feedback loop back to future situations that you're going to have later on. So how does Casper and Preview really evaluate this? By the nature of how they're formulated. Casper is a more open-ended, free response type situational judgment test. And they ask you, what would you do in this situation? So it asks you to go through most of these steps in the decision-making process. Preview, in contrast, presents you possible outcomes, and you are supposed to identify how effective or ineffective that response is given the situation. So it really only really tests you a little bit more on that last step. And you can kind of see, if you think about it that way, how both tests are definitely testing different things about your decision-making process. And of course, that results in the very highly different responses that you get on each of those exams. So a few other things to keep in mind when you're looking through it. So it's not just your decision-making process. What are the things that you, need to notice in the whole entire process of every situation that you get? First of all, who are the other people that you are in your situation? Are they peers? Are there people with different power hierarchies? Is there someone not in the situation that you can also appeal to who has more supreme authority? So these are things that kind of run through your head. And certainly you will hear from everybody. What's also very important is the rules. What etiquette, what professionalism code are you expected to follow under that circumstance? And can you recognize it? And I don't necessarily just restrict myself or anybody to medical or professional ethics. We also have obviously a lot of emphasis on academic integrity, student codes of conduct, and even the concept of justice and equity and cultural competency also come into play. So these are some of the examples of other sort of rules that you should be performing to satisfy your professional role, or at least be as pre-professional as you can. So can you recognize that one way or another? I mentioned that a lot of people will leverage their past experiences. And when we did our survey, we asked what past experiences really helped you on situational judgment tests, especially for preview. But in general, we found that a lot of life experiences really became very useful in terms of what you did in your employment, in your volunteering, in teaching and leading organizations, and participating with your peers or with other groups. Coursework also, I had prompted, was there any courses that really helped you with that? And we have that in categories where your humanities, your sociology, psychology, or research projects really come into play when it is in terms of helping you with the situational judgment tests. And that information actually is also confirmed in that preview report that I had pointed out a little bit earlier. And of course, other resources, when it comes to push comes to shove, people are looking all over for resources. And among the free resources that are available are the ones that the test makers have available on their websites. I put the UCAT resources, that's the British version of their situational judgment test. So if you want to sort of see how they do situations, you can go over there, but they have a free tutorial and question bank over there. And a lot of other places where people like to go get some insight about these tests. I would like to summarize that for Casper, be prepared to be introduced to more real life scenarios, and in preview, be prepared for more academic medicine culture scenarios in terms of the way that many of the situations or scenarios are slanted, or at least written. So I think we have a little bit of time here. We're going to go really quickly through some situations, and I'm going to start off with the Casper or MMI ones, because I want to give you an idea with some, basic questions that if you were going to slow down and see how you would evaluate each of these situations. We're not going to have any time to discuss them. And for this first bit, I want you to, when you get a chance to review this presentation, give yourself an opportunity to answer the 6 questions that come on with each of these situations. My goal in this presentation is to just show you a variety of different scenarios. They're not going to be limited to Casper, because I don't write for Casper. But I've written MMI questions before. And so these are some scenarios that, I, as a person who would draft these MMI type questions, would be submitting and would be subjecting, excuse my language for that one, subjecting candidates who are interviewing to, and just to see how you would respond to them. So let's start off with one of these here. And in some cases, I cite TV shows. One of my favorites for this situation is What Would You Do? It's on ABC. They have videos that are on YouTube that have been around for over a decade. Give yourself a chance to run through some of those. But as you kind of read through some of these scenarios, here's one which is not clinical at all. You're working in a restaurant, you happen to be a server, you're serving a couple on a blind date, giving them their drinks. As they wait for their entrees, the woman happens to go to the bathroom, and you notice the man in this date putting something in the woman's drink, which happens to be iced tea because you served them, and stirring the drink with the straw. So what would you do? And so one of the things that I usually will say, rather than giving you 3 questions that I would for Casper, I want you to think about whether you've observed a similar situation. Are there other players in the scenario, and what's the power relationship among them? What are the rules that are in play? You're working for this restaurant. These guys are out on a date, on a blind date. So what are rules that really come into play here? What are some plausible explanations that explain what's actually going on in the scenario? And then think about what would happen if you didn't do anything. Is that the right thing to do, or are there some bad consequences if you decided not to do anything at all? And then, of course, identify things that you can do, what your limits are, and what the consequences are in that case. So for a lot of these other scenarios, just keep in mind for this purpose, I'm just going to show you sort of a mindset, a heuristic, a similar set of questions that you will develop as you come and you're confronted with some of these situations. And that'll help you with MMIs, with Casper, a lot of situational scenario type questions that you may be confronted with. Like, for example, this one is a little bit more of what you're doing in a study group. You're taking a break. And so, you guys are just scrolling through short videos on your phones or on your computers, as you will. And you notice one of your peers says, hey, I see a female classmate, letter G. And it looks like G is featured in a few sexually suggestive clips. Some videos seem to be recorded in on-campus study rooms, and you even recognize some homes where some of those videos are being recorded. Is that really G? And do you recognize that house? I think that's Professor X's house. So again, under those situations, what would you do? Think very carefully about the scenarios. Certainly think about the rules, what's in play, what's being tested in this case, about your awareness of how you should act or react in such a situation. What are the possible consequences of not doing anything, and what are the various avenues that you should take in terms of action that would be appropriate? There's another one, something that I hope will be a little bit more interesting given our current events. You volunteered at a museum and you bring along a dozen friends for a reception for a new exhibition, which happens to be focusing on the suffering of abandoned children. But you and your friends are offended because you think this exhibition is unnecessarily traumatizing. So the artist who happens to be there for this reception is going to be giving his remarks or their remarks, and your friends then begin to jeer, heckle, and interrupt the speaker. The museum leadership who is on the platform sees you standing with the protesters. What would you do? I know if you probably want to have an answer key. I completely get it. You want there to be an answer, but I think the point is right now, I'm not giving you any questions. These are your questions that you should be thinking on your own as you are being presented with these scenarios. And if you're in an MMI, you'll probably get these questions one at a time, or you can get them all at once as it would be in terms of, and it'd be very similar with Casper as well. So I'm just laying the scene for you. I want you to be able to identify what are the major important players and what are the rules that you're expected to answer, and that will help you formulate an answer for yourself. Now, okay, let's go to something a little bit more clinical. You're in an emergency room and you're supposed to discharge a patient who recovered from a very serious cardiac event a few days ago. The patient refuses because they're afraid of returning to their apartment that happens to be located in a high crime neighborhood. It's now 2 a.m. and a dozen other triage patients have been waiting and are now getting very confrontational with staff. So what would you do? So again, go through that whole process. Really think, what are you expected to do? What are other options that are available? What's the consequences of inaction? And then I'll finish up this section with a video example. And I'm very grateful to the MedSchoolCoach team for sharing this video that they to help us with this discussion. So let me play this for you guys. And again, think about what's being presented to you and sort of get a sense right now of, how would you anticipate the questions? What are you expected to answer along that scenario? So let me see if this will actually work for everybody. Yes, it is. So it's about a minute long, and I hope you hear the answers. I think I have it set so sound is shared.
On the next screen, you'll be shown a video. Please watch it, and then you'll be directed to 3 questions related to the video.
So I talked to Bob yesterday about why he hasn't been pulling his weight in our group project.
And?
He has a totally legitimate reason.
What is it?
Well, here's the thing. He asked me not to say anything because it's too personal.
That's ridiculous. We should know, considering we've been covering for him.
Yeah.
Well, I just told you that he has a totally legitimate reason.
So are you saying you don't trust us?
No.
Yeah, you should tell us. We're not gonna tell anyone.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like I'm betraying his confidence.
We're not gonna tell him you told us.
Yeah, besides, did you actually tell him that you weren't going to tell anyone?
Well, not exactly, but the fact that I listened to him probably implied that I wouldn't.
It's no big deal. We're a group. That means if you learn anything, you should tell us.
What would you do?
What I would do in this situation is really try to find out more information about the class.
So thank you guys from MedSchoolCoach for providing this video. I love these videos because unlike those regular type situations that I certainly came up with, these videos really have a lot of additional nuance that one can't really capture very well on the written word. So pay very close attention if you do have these video scenarios and understand, these questions still apply, but you probably have gained some additional information about what's really going on in this scene that will help you with constructing an answer that way. Let's get to this. Okay, so if you are wondering what would constitute a quote acceptable answer, the folks at Acuity Insights recently did a survey of all their raters to see, what is involved with getting a high mark on a Casper scenario that they happen to be scoring. And this is basically a lot of the summary of that. And it is very consistent with some of the advice that has been basically handed down for the last decade about what a good response would be like. They want to see responses that show that the applicant can understand and interpret social dilemmas in very nuanced and complex ways, justify their approaches, propose novel and creative ideas or solutions, demonstrate critical thinking and sound professional and ethical judgment, consider multiple perspectives, and this last piece, reflexively use examples from your past or from your own experiences and demonstrate key aspects of things like social intelligence and professionalism. And so I want to make sure that these are just the general boundaries that you should keep in mind when you're doing any sort of answer, not just Casper, but also MMI type format where you are actually allowed to explain yourself in those types of situations. So this was something that was just completed back at the end of 2023, and I'm glad that they made it public so I can share it with you, and I don't have any fear of anything that I'm breaching any confidentiality. And as I mentioned, there's tons of articles that we at Student Doctor Network have published that pretty much align with many of those findings too. So, just do a search for Casper on the Student Doctor Network blog site, and you can kind of see your way through. And I also will throw in my own sort of suggestion, a heuristic. I use what's called the STARE answer, which is similar to a CARS or STARS answer format, where I basically have you think about the situation, think about the task that you're assigned to do, the action or the alternative that you would take to that situation, focus on an impact, and reflect back on what the consequences are for taking the actions the way that you do. So again, you will get access to all of these slides in the recording later on, and you should be able to sort of dive in and dive through it. Now, for this section, I do want to make sure that we are as up-to-date and responsive as possible. So for the next 5 questions, I'm going to have you rank which of the types of proposed responses you would take are the ones you would most likely take to least likely take. This is a variation of situational judgment tests known as ranking. And that's kind of what Preview is asking you to do. It's certainly what the UCAT, the UK version, does a lot more is with ranking, but they are more or less cut from the same cloth. And I want to see how you respond. So in your answers to many of these scenarios, I basically want to see a whole flood in the webinar chat of 1s, 2s, or 3s in a sequence. 1, 2, 3, 1, 3, 2, or whatever else. And I just want to see how you guys would answer. No one's taking score. There's no prizes. There's no one's going to no one's going to punish you if you had a wrong answer. So let's start off with this one. And so you and your lab partner, you're going to be writing independent lab reports, even though you work together in your lab. You have a deadline set for tomorrow. Rio wants your help with the discussion in the discussion section of this report. You're about to submit your report, but you're now getting help from your teammate. And so what would you do? So here are 3 possible outcomes. And all you need to do is just type in 1, 2, or 3 and give me all 3 numbers in order of what you're most likely to answer versus least likely. Most preferred response to least preferred response for you. Do you give Rio a copy of your report or draft? Do you agree to read it over and edit the draft? Do you suggest that Rio ask the lab proctor or the TA to review the draft? So just sort of throw your numbers, your 3 digits into the chat, and just go have at it. It's no problem. And I appreciate you guys just sort of just jumping in here and there. We're going to have 5 of these. So this is the first one. All right, so I'm going to count to 3, 2, 1. And let's go to the second scenario. There's 5 of these. So here's the second scenario for everybody. So let's see, scenario 2. So I make sure I put myself in here. So here's a scenario where you have a conflict. How do you resolve this conflict, especially with your other club members who are supposed to be helping you out with this event? And so here are the 3 possible responses. So again, give us the response that you would most likely take to the one that you would least likely take. Again, I want all 3 numbers, 1, 2, 3, in whatever order. Again, I'm going to erase this really quickly because I know you're going to get this recording later on, and I'm sure dead time doesn't really go well with recording. So I'm going to continue and move on in a few seconds here. Scenario 3 in the chat section. I'm going to give you a few seconds. All right, count you down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, so I'm going to put in my scenario 3 marker here. Here's your third scenario, and it's actually from the same episode of What Would You Do if you did decide to look back and stream some of the more recent episodes. So you're waiting in a checkout line, and the person in front of you can't pay for their child's shoes that that child is going to get for their birthday. So what would you do? So again, put it in order, the response you would most likely take and to the least likely take. And I know, just in case you guys are wondering, is there a real correct answer key to this? No, these are not questions that are designed to have a specific answer key. It is, again, designed to engage you on the topic, which is, what sort of things would you do, and kind of figure out, how do you assess the situation? Here's situation number 4. And this time it's a more of a clinical based scenario. You're going to find this is a variation of a scenario that's available as a preview question in one of the practice exams. So this should actually be interesting for those of you who would like to compare your ranking of responses compared to what the answer key says you should do according to at least the preview practice test. So with, most likely, what are you most likely going to, how you respond versus least likely? Okay, I'm going to count you down again. And we're going to get to our last scenario. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm going to mark this on the chat. And let's go to our last one here. Will you sit down on a one-on-one interview at a professional program Y 1 week after you interviewed at your top choice program, which is program X? Interviewer asks you about other schools where you happen to have interviewed or will interview. How do you respond? Well, here's 3 possible ways. Tell me which is your order, most likely to least likely to respond to this scenario. And all I just want is your numbers, 1, 2, 3, in whatever order you decide. So I'm sure many of you are chomping at the bit, wanting to discuss your answers. And I would love to be able to have the time to go over your answers in greater detail, but we don't have that in this format here. So I want to make sure that you know, as we continue on with a lot of the resources that we do have. I just recently wrote sort of a summation article about all the various resources SDN has developed to help people along with their application. So feel free, it's a very recent article that we published earlier in the month that you can access. This is part of a program that I've been developing over the last 2 or 3 years, which is Becoming a Student Doctor. It's not your application bootcamp type class that you might have either at school or that MedSchoolCoach actually provides. Either of those ways are really great. It's meant to complement a lot of that with providing additional curated information that may help you, not necessarily with situational judgment tests, but for any sort of scenario or topic that you might be confronted with in your medical education. And it's there is a charge for it for people who, but it's a membership charge for being part of SDN, or if you happen to have qualified for an FAP waiver or can demonstrate you graduated from a school, high school in the US that was a medically underserved area, you can petition to get free access to this resource. And one other thing I just want to make sure I emphasize, we are also in the process this month of soliciting individuals who'd like to also help steer us to identify further initiatives that SDN should take on as part of the HIPSA Student Advisory Council. So if you are interested, we are taking and soliciting letters of interest and a brief resume just to give us an idea. So you could be pre-health, pre-dental, pre-vet, whatever, or you may already be in a health professional program. We like and strive for a variety and diversity of different professions and different geographies and different individuals and perspectives to be part of our group, as long as you're enthusiastic and want to help us out with that. Certainly MedSchoolCoach, and I'm sure I don't want to necessarily step on the scripts for everybody else. The MedSchoolCoach team obviously has an entire suite and a program to help you along with your application. And I don't know, Renee, if you want to go ahead and take over from here for the last couple of slides.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was such an excellent presentation. Yeah, so MedSchoolCoach, we are here to help you. So we have about 80 physician advisors who have gone through the process and now have served on admissions committees and reviewed applicants and really seen what it takes to get into medical school. And so when you work with us at MedSchoolCoach, you get paired with one of our physician advisors, and the physician advisor will take you through every step of the application process, including these SJTs, and provide personalized feedback and support for you. And it really depends on where you're at in the application cycle. But if you're actively applying, right now is a great time to reach out to us, because AMCAS just opened, gosh, was it today? Couldn't remember if today was the 1st or the 2nd. So it just opened today. And so I know a lot of people are starting to get things together for their application, and we can certainly help you with that, and then provide you with some prep and some support and feedback for your Casper test and for your preview exam.
And let me see. And so this is your last slide too, before we get to the Q&A slide.
Thank you. Yeah, so scan this QR code if you're interested. It is definitely still time to sign up with us, even if you are applying this year. I mean, we have a month, so it's definitely crunch time. But if you are interested, this is the time to book a meeting with us and start talking to our enrollment team so that we can get you going and get your application in on time.
And with that, I think we're at questions and answers. So thank you so much for having me here. It's a lot of stuff. Please take your time when you get the recording to review some of the slides and some of the information there. And I'm more than happy, I'm sure we're more than happy to field questions about what you just saw. And I hope it's, if you have any more questions, don't hesitate to reach out to our team as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Chuck, and thank you, Dr. Marinelli. We have a couple of questions that have kind of come up during the time of the webinar. The first question, and I'll direct it to you, Dr. Marinelli, and then I'll go back and forth. The first question is, does tone of voice or facial expression influence scoring if the student uses a video submission, or is it purely based on what was said?
That's a great question. And I believe that Casper is it does evaluate for both. Dr. Chuck, maybe you can verify that, but I mean, it is going to be a little bit about your delivery too and how you are delivering your responses.
Yeah, I think there is a component where your delivery is very important. Part of it is because there's some security features that really are very important too. They want to make sure you're not just scanning the room and looking at notes or whatever else that might be posted behind your monitor or something else like that. But they are looking for authentic answers, and they want to make sure that you are properly engaged with the question. So, I don't know whether, tone of voice or pitch of voice or anything else like that is specifically scored. And I don't think it is specifically scored, but for those of us who've been running interviews of all formats in any way, shape, or form, doing face-to-face interviews, you do want to keep that in mind as you are preparing for any format of interview whatsoever.
Thank you both. Dr. Chuck, the next question I can give to you. If this were a typed response prompt, are we allowed to use bullet points, or do we need to respond in full sentences in paragraph form?
That's a fantastic question. And I even think that the Acuity Insights team is very, I guess, equivocal about what format they would prefer. So I think as for what I know right now, I think it is fine to use both formats, but certainly, when we're talking about type formats, I think for sure you do want to just make sure that your responses are as complete as possible. That the slide that I showed you at the very end is what the raters say they find favorable for those responses that they score high, whether it's video responses or typed responses. So your manner of organizing your thoughts, I don't know, and it's nothing has been told to me or nothing has been shown to me that says that bullet points versus prosaic, responses, if one is much more preferred than the other. They really want to see how you solve the problem.
And interestingly enough, to kind of touch on that, and the last question is that Altus doesn't tell you their exact rubric or gives you, their exact rating and how that is evaluated. And I think that's part of it, is just kind of doing your best and making sure that you're practicing as much as possible so that you are kind of, formulating responses that as Chuck said, are authentic and genuine. And then make sure that you're expressing yourself in a meaningful manner as well. I mean, using shorthand and bullet points may seem easier, but that may not actually get your point across or really express your ideas appropriately. So I think practice typing that out and practice writing full sentences is probably the best way to go and the best way to be successful on these tests.
Thank you, Dr. Marinelli and Dr. Chuck. The next question is, can you give some logistical background on when should students take the SJT and the Casper exam, and where do they go to kind of sign up for these exams?
Yeah, I'll take that one. We usually suggest that students take these exams sometime around the secondary season is what I call it. So I usually try to have people prioritize submitting their primary application or AMCAS or AO COMAS, whichever ones they're applying to. And then afterwards, kind of treat this as part of the secondaries, register for the Casper and Duet exam too, which is part of the Altus suite. And in preview, the last time I checked is that it was still an invite from schools that you are applying to. And they may have just changed that this cycle, but I believe last cycle they actually invited you to take the test. And then there were certain test dates that were in June or July. I would just try to get it done sometime in June or July is usually ideal. You definitely don't want to wait too long because this is part of the entire review of your application. So you want to make sure you have that in time so that schools can review this along with your AMCAS application, your secondary application, and then hopefully leading to an interview.
Thank you. Oh,
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, so my particular answer for that for you guys too, and I know, take a look at both of the testing websites. They have a lot of information there. But as for timing, given the volume of the number of schools that are using one versus the other, not all schools are going to go through an invite only to have you take the test. So you also have to understand the rules too. Casper is such that you have to take the score within the application cycle in which you are active. So old scores don't count. And that's something that you need to keep in mind as you're creating your school lists, that you have to kind of think, when am I going to take the Casper exam? Or when do I take the preview exam? I let people know, very similar to Dr. Marinelli's advice. Most of these SJTs, when the MCAT was reconfigured back in 2015, the original intent was to include an SJT at the very end, the way that the UCAT is formulated over at the UK for their entrance exam. And it was ultimately determined it wasn't feasible to do that. So I guess if you were going to take that type of lead, you want to think about taking your preview exam close to when you take your MCAT. So, or shortly thereafter. And that's probably a really decent, good rule of thumb. You don't need to over prepare in the same way that you're going to be preparing for the MCAT. One of the things that AAMC did this year that adds an additional wrinkle to this conundrum of when you should take the preview exam is that they now are allowing individuals to retake the preview exam during the same application cycle. So you can take it twice during an entire application cycle and 4 times throughout your lifetime. AAMC, unlike the Acuity Insights folks, they have not declared that there is an expiration to your preview score. So it is basically left up to the schools to determine how recent you need to take your preview score for it to count in their process. So if you're going to use the MCAT as an example, and a lot of schools say you need a valid MCAT score within the last 3 years, if you have a really high performing result for preview, you could likely keep that score for 3 years, and you wouldn't have to take it again until you retake the MCAT. So again, it's a little bit of a different curveball that just got thrown in for this year for those who are using preview versus Casper. And there's like 3 or 4 schools that are actually asking you to take one or the other, and it counts one way or another. But again, it's a very confusing world, and we're doing whatever, at least I'm doing whatever I can to kind of figure out what really is going on. So I think, in short, the earlier you can take it, the better. I think some of you who might be on the Take Casper website may realize that the dates right now are ending in June. I assure you, there will be more dates that are added. I'm fairly certain that when you see these cycles over and over again, for the medicine group, they continue on until usually November or December. So it's just that they just haven't put it up on their calendar yet.
Yeah. And thanks, Jesse. Just popped that in the chat too, of which schools require preview and then how to register for preview. So you're only registering for preview if you are applying to one of those schools that require or recommend preview. So it's not like you just have to do it if you're applying to medical school in general. So you have to look at that list and make sure that, yeah, okay, I'm applying to X school, it's on this list. So yes, I do need to take preview, and you can register for preview, and then where that all that registration date and those test dates are just posted. Jesse just dropped that link, so thank you. And the score release is interesting too. It's similar to the MCAT, where they release the score about a month later. So you want to plan for that as well. Is okay, hey, schools aren't going to receive my score, so even if I took it July 24th, well, now they're not going to receive it until August 22nd is what the anticipated score date is. So you want to make sure that you're planning for that too, just like the MCAT, where you want to make sure your score is there so that it can be reviewed for your application.
And AMCAS will also give you the opportunity to flag a future preview attempt, just like they would for the MCAT. So everything, again, don't get too worked up about it. Again, the early results that you saw from our survey suggest it's still, the jury is still out for medical school admissions and how they use the preview scores. This past year was the first year it was fully implemented, where test dates were available from March instead of just starting in the summer, like July and August and going forward. So this is the second year where all of that is in play again. And so with 1 year's worth of working with the data in real time throughout an entire cycle underway, who knows if things are going to change with regards to how they would use those scores. But ask the schools that require preview if they need you to have the reported score in the same way they would want your MCAT score, or are they just going to use it later on in the screening process? That's still something that is still mysterious.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of that. And I think, to go off that, Dr. Chuck, too, is like, I feel like I've done this presentation now for the last several years, and each year it has to change, because there has been so much change. And even what, 2 or 3 years ago, preview didn't exist and it was the AMC Vita test. And before that, I think it was just called the SJT. And so things have been really changed rapidly, even within the Alta suite, which has even changed names multiple times. So it's definitely something that I think it's keeping students on their toes, and they just need to definitely look very closely at each school's requirements and recommendations that they're applying to.
Thank you, Dr. Chuck and Dr. Marinelli. We have 5 minutes left, so I'm going to push 2 more questions your way. If you guys have any questions that Dr. Chuck or Dr. Marinelli did not get to answer, I'm going to drop my email in the chat. Feel free to email me and I'll pass those questions off and get them answered for you. One of the questions we have is, what advice can you provide to balance objectivity with subjectivity when it comes to the questions that seem primarily subjective?
Do you want to try that one first? I don't know.
I'll let you go with it.
So that's a nice, very fantastic sort of super high level question in terms of how do you balance objectivity with subjectivity. I think one of the things you have to remember is, unlike the scenarios that I posted to you here, the scenarios you're going to have on Preview or Casper will be multiply vetted, and that they are essentially standardized questions. So, I mean, I do think that, yes, it might be easy to get caught in detail, subjective nuance, and so forth. But I want to emphasize for you that, one, if you're on Casper and it's a typed question, the clock is running on you. So I think they just want the basic fundamentals of things that you would consider. And again, given the free response nature of that exam, you could go in and do some of your nuances and sort of identify one of the things that are important data points that you would need to make a more definitive decision. For Preview, on the other hand, it's multiple choice. It's either most effective or most ineffective, and the 2 points in between, and you just have to make a call. Theoretically, they say that if you get close, however that's defined, you somewhat get partial credit. Unfortunately, it's not clear when I read the answer key what partial credit looks like from their answer key. So I'm still wondering exactly what they mean by that when they score the exam. So I think the major thing is, get the major issues out of the way first before delving into other sort of subjective nuance.
I think that's a great point. And just because we only have a couple minutes left, and one of the things I tell students of, being most upfront is just, especially for Casper, it's about doing the right thing. Like, obviously that's subjective to each person what the right thing really is, but usually it's pretty obvious in these questions is, okay, am I going to report the cheating that I saw to the professor? Am I going to, talk to my friend about not pulling their weight? It's about doing the right thing that's going to benefit the other people in the group situation or benefit the most people. So I feel like, even though, again, that is subjective, if you kind of go with your gut there, usually that will lead you down the right path. And that's like a 30-second just blip and summary of how I kind of will advise students on how to tackle some of these, but at least start there. And like that can definitely help you lead to the right response. And as you said, I agree totally. Like, don't get caught up with all those nuances. You don't have a ton of time here. You just kind of need to figure out what the issue is at hand, what's the right thing to do, and start drafting your answer.
Thank you, Dr. Marinelli. Last question here for the day. If a school strongly recommends to take a preview exam, does it really hinder your chances if you don't take it? And I'll start off with Dr. Marinelli.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a lot of the unknown, right? There's a lot where we just don't know exactly how admissions committees are reviewing these, but I would say that when schools indicate that they strongly recommend it, that probably means you should take it. And you should prepare and you should try to do well on it, of course. And if even if it's strongly recommended and not required, there's going to be people that submit with those test scores. And so you're going to be held up to those other applicants. And so you don't want to just, not pay attention and just say, I'll wing it and just not prepare for it. So treat it as part of your application. And I probably would recommend taking it. I think there's some extenuating circumstances, of course, right? If it's just like, I can't prepare for it, I don't have time or this or that, well, maybe we discuss and maybe it's best you don't take it, or this is not your strong suit or whatever. But I think for the most part, when it's a strongly recommended or optional, most students will complete it. And I usually recommend completing something like that.
We are used to the recommended course list. I think what happens with the recommended course list, right? You wind up taking it. I do want to make sure people know this. The official word from the admissions folks, if they are recommending it, is they will take your application, and it's not something that they will require as part of, it needs to be a completed part of your application for you to be considered for an interview. But again, the terminology is still very vague in terms of how you recommend a particular exam. What's more controversial is the fact that there's over 30 programs that are claiming they want preview scores that they will do for research. And there is definitely, what's the difference between recommended and doing it for research? Why are you having applicants pay for an exam that you're doing research on? That's a totally different conversation that we could go into later. But at this time, there is no clarification on how those 30 plus schools that are using preview results for research, what they want you to do. Is it okay for you to take it or not okay for you to take it, and so forth. So it's that chunk of schools that we still have yet to hear from.
Amazing. Thank you, Dr. Chuck, and thank you, Dr. Marinelli. Now that we're at the top of the hour, that was the last question we had time for. So again, thank you so much, Dr. Chuck and Dr. Marinelli, for your time today and for all of the advice you guys gave to students. Just a friendly reminder, you guys will get a recording of the webinar 24 hours after the webinar finished. So 24 hours from right now, you'll get a recording. If you guys have any questions, I dropped my email into the chat. If your Q&A didn't get answered, feel free to email me and I'll make sure that it gets answered and sent back to you. And with that, I hope everyone has a great night and talk to you soon. Thank you.
Good luck with your application cycle if you're starting today.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.